Welcome back, soapsters, and in today's tutorial we're going to be looking at doing a wavy soap. Now you may have spotted online, if you use various other social media platforms, a wavy cheesecake soap that was around. And what I've done is inserted the video just here so you can have a look to see exactly what this wavy cheesecake looks like, and you can see how that kind of undulates up and down with a very thin line in the middle, and it inspired me for this soap. And so what we're going to be doing is using mica lines. Now I'm going to share with you my tips and tricks on mica lines and how to actually get a really good looking mica line easily without your soap falling apart. And we do need to have our batter for this particular technique at a relatively thick trace, and this recipe has a higher proportion of solid oils in it, particularly cocoa butter, in order to give me that thicker trace that will allow me to then use this scraping tool through it and to get some really nice crisp lines in it, which you'll see a little bit later on. So we're going to give this a quick stick blend now, and we're going to bring this, as I say, to a kind of medium trace. Now we do need to have enough work time, so I'm splitting my batch down into two sections. We're going to work on the first few initial sections first, and then what we're actually going to do is I'm going to leave this to saponify overnight. Now I'm only doing that because I have heard a lot of people say, well, you can't leave a soap overnight and use a mica line and then come back to it. And I'm going to say, yes, you can, and I'm going to prove it in this video here. So we're going to pour our first layer out here. Now, I was trying to measure out, but realistically, I needed a thicker bottom, and it didn't really kind of work with the amounts that you'll see on the screen. So ignore the amounts. But what first of all I'm going to do is pour enough of my thickening batter, and you can see that we've got a kind of medium trace there at the moment, and this is going to thicken up as we go through. So the first layer goes in, and you'll see that it doesn't quite meet where I need it to come to. And what I'll do is add a little bit more in. But this is the nice thing with these sorts of soaps, is you can play around with it. You can always make a little more batter, and you can come back to it as you need to. So this doesn't have to be done in one session, and it can be done over a few. But you just need to let that layer that you put in last set up equivalently to the rest of them. You can pop each of these layers or each of these sections, so it's absolutely fine. As you can see here, I've got my scraper. I've 3D printed this out, but you can make this out of cardboard or thin plastic. Anything like that will work. I just happen to have a 3D printer that I've used for this one. And the idea behind my scraper is that I've got a wavy pattern which stops with a half curve, and I can flip this backwards and forwards, and you'll see in the end how I messed up the very final layer. So I got everything right except the final layer, but these things happen, and we're going to share the mistakes as well as the successes. So what you can see here is I've got enough of the batter in there that I can scrape this backwards and forwards and just make sure I'm filling in all of these little gaps. Any excess comes out, and we scrape that off into our little container here, and that can go into another layer. Once you start getting a bit of colour in there, it does kind of make it a little bit dirty, so you have to be a little bit careful with that. But I'm going in and I'm just scraping this through. If you have any little gaps or little sections which are not filled, you can go back in and fill them, which is quite important when you're doing, say, landscapes, or you're doing something that's very noticeable as a shape. But for this one, because it just undulates up and down, we can get away with being a little bit more sloppy. And this batter is probably a little bit under traced for scraped layers, but it's good enough. And because we've got those nice curves, if I go with it too heavy, we could really distort it. Whereas this, where we're at now, which is the kind of lower end of a thick trace, it is going to allow me enough time to kind of work it and get some really nice undulations and make sure I'm getting everything in the right orientation, which is really important for this one. And you'll see the last one doesn't quite work on it. Now we are going to work in rainbow order for this. So we're starting with purple. I've got these little tea strainers, but you can just use a normal kind of strainer or sieve or one of those little tea strainers. And I'm just putting on a relatively thin, but not sparse layer of this. So I want enough of this colour in that it's really going to show up. And sometimes it gets a little bit sparse in there and they don't show up particularly well. But here is the trick with working with these mica lines to get them to stick. Okay, so as we all know, soap is a humectant. It draws moisture into itself, okay? What you're doing with mica is you're essentially putting in a dry powder, which is going to be separating those two bits of soap with moisture, and you're basically stopping the moisture from connecting with one another. So what do you do in that respect? Well, it's easy. You just need to add some moisture back in. And what I have is a little spray bottle with some distilled water in it, and I'm going to spray the surface of my mica with that distilled water before I put the next layer on. Okay, and I spray it before I kind of make up and get into it. Now, what this can do is make it a little bit slippery, so you're worth kind of just getting everything cleaned up, getting it sprayed in, allowing it to kind of soak in and soak into the mica, and then come back in with your next layer. But you can see here, I'm just giving it a good spray, making sure that it's very well moistened. Okay, so we're going to allow that mica to absorb some of that water, and it is going to make the connection between our next layer of soap and the first layer we've put in a lot stronger, and it will just mean that you'll get a better looking layer. As you can see here, I've gone in with the blue and we're scraping that down. I've sprayed that again. We're going to go in with the green, spray that down, go in with another layer and come in with our yellow. Now, at this point, I stopped for the evening because it was kind of late and I needed to come back the next day. So this is the next day. And you'll notice again, I sprayed it before I started. I've gone in with my next layer. I've gone in with the orange, sprayed it down, gone in with my next layer of soap, gone in with the red mica, sprayed it down, and gone in with my final layer of soap. So we've sped through those bits quite quickly. And now we're coming into our red layer. And again, you'll see I do exactly the same here. I'm going to put the red mica in, spray it with my distilled water, and then go in with the final layer of soap. So here's my red. And what I find is this really does help giving you good mica lines that are visible in the final soap rather than being just non-existent, and also making sure the soap sticks together, be it on the same day or coming back to it another day or a day after. As long as you wet that mica down, I haven't had any problems with it. Okay, so we're going to get this red in, and I've kind of, again, sped through it so you can see this is the final layer. And I've made a mistake on this last scrape. So this last scrape doesn't follow the undulations like I wanted it to. But again, we are not perfect. We don't do it right all the time. And actually, it doesn't matter. If you make a mistake, enjoy the process and remember for next time to do that. So there we go. We're just spraying that last little bit down. We'll wipe the edges down and come in with our final bit of soap. So you can really see how I'm moistening that down. I'm putting a good amount of sprayed water in. It's going to sit there for a little while. It's going to kind of absorb into that mica. It's going to go into the soap below, and the two soap layers are going to connect through that moisture. All right. So I've turned my scraper over. The undulations are on the top, and I'm just using that flat edge to scrape this last bit down. So I'm getting a really nice flat top to it. And that's a really nice way of just creating that final layer of being nice and flat. Some scrapers that you might buy will have alternate ends being different shapes, but I'm sure you'll have one there, or a piece of cardboard just with a nice flat edge to scrape this final layer. If you don't have one and you want to get a really nice final layer, you just need to bring your last little bit of soap, just save the oil, save the lye, make up that little last batch so it's very liquid, and pour that on and allow it to self-level. And that's the other way of doing it. You can see here I'm just pulling that backwards and forwards. You do get a little bit of bleed from the mica, but it tends to be on the edges and the outside. And realistically, you are going to kind of plane this down, or you're going to lose those two edges. So as long as your middle section is nice and neat and tidy, I actually don't find there is a problem with too much bleeding of that mica through. Excuse the head there. So you can just see that that's how we kind of scrape all of these layers, and we get these really beautiful, crisp layers. So because this is an acrylic mold and I want it to come out relatively easily, what you do need to do with these, I find, is actually pop them in the freezer for a couple of hours before you're ready to unmold it. The freezing of the soap will actually allow those layers to just kind of pop away from each other quite easily. So you can see there, literally everything just fell off, and I had a little bit of trouble getting it off this last piece. But you just kind of get a little bit of the mold, and it will come away. And now we're on to the cutting of the soap. I'm going to cut this one in sections using my single wire cutter. I'm just going to take the very, very fine edge off of this one, and then we'll see how well I did with these mica lines. And I'm very pleased with them, as I say, except for that last line. So let's just take an edge off here. And again, with these things, you just want to keep a consistent pressure going. And unlike I did there, try not to stop in the middle of it. Try and keep going nice and smoothly, and then just ease off right towards the edge there. So I can see I've made the mistake there. Let's cut a proper bar, and I'll show you exactly how these look in a second. So I am cutting this bar with the bar frozen, and it cuts perfectly well, so it's very easy to do that. So we're going to just go through here nice and gently, get this first bar out, and here is the first bar. So you can see that top line is following the waves rather than going in the opposite direction, but it doesn't matter. We all make these mistakes, and I'm not infallible, and I do make these mistakes, and this is probably one of those mistakes I am always going to make because I get so involved in it, and I just like pouring the soap and I want to get it done, and I don't always concentrate. So it's one of those things. So let's get to the point where you can see all of these in their glory. And here's our final soap, and as you can see there, we've got the undulations almost going in the right direction, except that top line, which is just a mistake on my part. And those mica lines are really standing out, which is exactly what I wanted from this soap. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the bell icon if you'd like to get notified when a new video is uploaded. And thanks a lot, Soapsters. I'll see you again next time.